Okay, I actually think I figured out how to get it to
Yep.
stream to class, and it's just loading right now. Oh, it says unsupported request.
Okay, that's fine. I think we can start it, right?
Yes,
Okay,
Access.
so, yep.
it's not streaming quite yet, but feel free to start whenever.
Okay. So, hello everyone. Welcome to our keynote presentation of this new year. Today we have a special keynote speaker, Dr. Isabel Medina. Will be presenting all about the research towards an hybrid indigenous heritage conservation in Latin American experiences, reflection, and roots. Before we get started, we will meet in the virtual platform. We solve our technological issues. We would like to acknowledge the importance of the land which we each call home. From coast to coast, we respectfully acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. Hola a todos y todas, bienvenidos a nuestra ponencia magistral de este nuevo año 2024-2025. Hoy día tenemos una invitada muy especial, a la doctora Isabel Medina, que nos va a contar sus investigaciones. Antes de comenzar, mientras se van uniendo los participantes a la reunión virtual y vamos solventando estos problemas tecnológicos que hemos tenido, nos gustaría reconocer la importancia de la tierra que cada uno consideramos y llamamos hogar. De costa a costa reconocemos con humildad y agradecimiento el territorio ancestral y eterno perteneciente al pueblo inuit, métis y primeras naciones cuyo hogar es en esta tierra. Ahora le paso la palabra a Patricia Campos, quien presentará a nuestra invitada.
Gracias, Patricia. I will present our special guest, Isabel Medina. Isabel holds a bachelor degree in heritage conservation from the National School of Conservation, Restoration, and Museum Studies that belongs to the National Institute of Anthropology and History in Mexico. She holds a master degree in archaeological heritage management from the University of York and a PhD in archaeology from University College London. In 2000, she was awarded the Young International Americanist Award, and in 2021, she won the INA Award for Best Research in Heritage Sector. She has worked for 30 years at INA as restorer, researcher, and teacher, particularly in the fields of heritage science, conservation theory, museum and conservation history, archaeological conservation, and indigenous heritage. Today, she is the leader of the UNESCO Chair on Conservation Sciences and senior professor at the National School of Conservation, Restoration, and Museum Studies. She has coordinated several projects on the investigation and preservation of pre-Columbian, industrial, and indigenous heritage in Latin America from interdisciplinary, intercultural, and sustainable perspectives. She has presented several conferences, published papers, and edited both books and journals worldwide. So we are very happy to have you here, Isabel. Thank you for joining, and I will pass the word to you so you can start with your presentation.
Thank you. Hello, good afternoon. Well, to begin with, I would like to thank the Canadian Latin American Archaeological Society, Patricia Campos, and all of you for this really fantastic opportunity to share my experiences and my thoughts in Canada. I'm a Mexican-Peruvian scholar who has spent really all my life transiting in cultural encounters. And this conversation draws on my personal experience and some theoretical and field experiences within the rather marginal but important field in archaeology, in situ archaeological conservation, which is discipline which often focuses on technical issues. Here, I would like to start with a brief theoretical framework, and I will put my presentation for you to have a look at, because the photographs are really something. Well, as many of you, I'm sure, know, alterity is a concept with an extensive yet elusive history. The multiple genealogies, practices, and inquiries of and about otherness are extremely complex in various contexts and disciplines. Yet, alterity in post-colonial theory often refers to dismantling the binary opposition and unequal relationships between the self and the other. Indeed, the last few decades have seen the emergence of post-colonial theory in various academic fields, including archaeology and more recently, heritage conservation. This trend has prompted self-criticism with the disciplines, discourses, and practices, and led to new approaches, particularly in museums. Indeed, in the museological context, we can find fruitful routes for indigenous archaeologies and conservation with new strategies that aim to empower aboriginal archaeology, aboriginal peoples, and prioritize native epistemological frameworks for managing, researching, and displaying their material culture. In Latin America, in situ archaeological conservation has lately become involved in decolonizing efforts, whose origins, processes, and outcomes are yet to be fully analyzed within their specific historical and political context. This lecture presents a case of study that critically examines how archaeological conservation could resemble conflicting Western and non-Western practices, introducing the concept of hybridity. Hybridity is a term commonly used in post-colonial theory to pose criticism to the rather monolithic alterity model offered by Said in its seminal work, Orientalism. According to Baba, hybridity is not only a combination of two identities within one person with an assumed imposed hierarchy, but it also creates a liminal space, an encounter frontier between overlapping cultures, and an ambivalent third space of cutting-edge translation and negotiation. Hybridization, which comprehends people, artifacts, sites, and practices, encompasses cultural encounters, cultural translation, cultural exchange, with addition, no substitution. Canclini, the Mexican anthropologist, proposes that cultural hybridism is a key instrument for explaining Latin American modernization processes in their contemporary context, as much as an effective analytical key to represent a kind of lasting post-modernity that would mark Latin American sociocultural dynamic. I employed hybridity not only to erase cultural difference. I employ it not to erase cultural differences or to cover disadvantaged power positions, but to situate them, comprehend them, dismantle them, and overcome them, creating a new set of relationships and formulating new languages and practices for in situ archaeological conservation, which are appropriate in a specific context. The participatory conservation process of the Diquis Pre-Columbian Chiefdoms in Costa Rica. This case study deserves an introduction. The Diquis Delta, located in the southeast of the current Republic of Costa Rica, comprises an alluvial territory of 500 kilometers with mountains, valley, and a coastal edge that stand out for their great diversity and ecological richness. These conditions undoubtedly favor human occupation, which extends from 1,500 BC to the present day. The archaeology of the Diquis has focused on studying the human groups that occupy this territory since they went from into simple social systems, villages, during the Sinacra period, between 1,500 to 300 BC, until the transformation into complex chiefdoms during the Aguas Blancas period. This is 300 BC, 800 AD. Considerable archaeological research has focused on understanding the gestation and development of the so-called Diquis chiefdom settlements, a set of pre-Columbian sites date to the Chiriqui period. This is between 500 and 1,500 Anno Domini, which represent the climax of the chiefdom structure and even its possible transformation into kingdoms. The Diquis chiefdom settlements are of significant importance in understanding the evolution of the Diquis culture. The complex material culture that characterizes the Diquis Pre-Columbian sites comprises formal architecture, mainly artificial mounds of earth associated with ring perimeters or walls, paving, ramps, and funerary crypts made of stone. One of their most notable features is the presence of stone sculpture, whose representation reached two unique forms in Latin American archaeology. On the one hand, flattened anthropological figures in the shape of a spike, and on the other hand, megalithic spheres. Both were made of various types of rock, including gabbro, gabbro-diorite, and in some cases, limestone. These unique features of the Diquis Pre-Columbian sites make them a fascinating subject for the study in archaeology. For much Costa Rican history, the Diquis Peninsula remained a largely marginal space. 16th century Spanish chronicles do not mention the pre-Hispanic sites with the spheres, but they do refer to the indigenous communities of Boruca and Coto. Over the next 2 centuries, these populations experienced the colonization of their lands, their acculturation, the formation of indigenous reservation, and processes of domination and resilience that would redefine their culture and society. The resilience of the Diquis community in the face of such challenges is truly inspiring. In the 1930s, critical territorial transformation took place due to the impact of the construction and implementation of infrastructure for the extensive cultivation of bananas by the United Fruit Company. With the new migrations, the Diquis underwent significant changes. The territory was divided into farms. New towns appeared, for example, Palmar Sur with its American sector, and others of pre-Columbian origins were renamed, for example, Palmar Norte. It was precisely at this juncture that Doris Stone and Samuel Lothrop documented the Diquis Pre-Columbian sites for the first time. In addition to recording their architecture, they reported the discovery of objects in ceramic, gold, and stone, including spheres, and published archaeological sites about them internationally. From then on, the Diquis spheres gained great notoriety, which unfortunately often meant their mobilization out of the sites and even the region and the country. The banana area is also fundamental to the history of the Boruca indigenous people. After the publication of the Boruca of Costa Rica, a book published by Doris Stone, a series of initiatives began to favor their political visibility. In fact, the first indigenous territory was established in 1956 within the Boruca Terra Bat Reserve, whose delimitation was strengthened by the indigenous laws of the 70s and the national and international norms for indigenous governance that came after. Now, during the second half of the 20th century, the Diquis spheres became elements of national pride and identity. However, it is notable that in the collective imagination, they tended to be seen as pieces of the contextualized from their archaeological sites of origins. That is, they were seen as just monuments without any relationship with the sites. Today, the Diquis Valley is one of the only places where the spheres are preserved in their original location, sometimes associated with architecture in alignments are close to the nuclear settlements. During the 1970s, the government of Costa Rica, to the National Museum of Costa Rica, assumed the responsibility for the study, protection, and care of 4 archaeological sites and their spheres, Finca 6, Batambal, Grijalba, El Silencio. It's not really the objective of this talk to give an account of the achievements of these initiatives, but suffices to say that archaeological projects have contributed fundamentally to understanding the nature of the sites, locating spheres, and excavating funerary votive contexts, all translating into essential knowledge of the indigenous past. Since the 1990s, the National Museum of Costa Rica also has taken on the task of cataloging, safeguarding, and caring for a considerable collection of pre-Columbian spheres, not only located in the Museum of Collections, but also in public spaces. This is parks, schools, and also in the above mentioned archaeological sites. This background was the basis for the application for the archaeological sites of Finca 6, Bantabal, Grifalga, and El Silencio to be included in the World Heritage List in 2013. From that year on, I was invited as professor at IMINA to participate as a strategic planning advisor for the nomination file and later on as the coordinator of the conservation program, mainly because in Costa Rica, there was no experience in situ conservation efforts. Now, the description of the Diquis Pre-Columbian sites on the World Heritage List was achieved in 2014, and this meant huge changes and challenges. For instance, the sites were projected internationally, which increased visibility and visits. Fortunately, the museum had already provided Finca 6 with a basic operational infrastructure and interpretation center. And as I explained before, the museum did not have previous experience in conservation of the spheres and monuments, which actually demanded attention and treatment, and thus our cooperation provided training for capacity building. In 2016, the conceptual strategic framework of the management plan was adjusted to fulfill the objectives of the action plan for World Heritage in Latin America and Caribbean. Thus, the new management plan covered 5 strategic lines: credibility, conservation, training, communication, and community. Based on this, several programs were designed, including the conservation program. This was a very important moment because the management plan was kind of realigned to fulfill this strategic line. As a result of that, the conservation program has undertaken several campaigns at the archaeological sites since 2016, which have been directed at the spheres located in situ and also in the small museum in Finca 6. And also we have worked in some associated architectural features. Basically, they have involved phases of value assessment, diagnosis, preventive conservation, direct intervention, maintenance, and monitoring. The conservation program has also contemplated transversal actions to contribute to complementary strategic lines. For instance, actions focus on strengthening the credibility of decision-making, and this led to establish clear methodologies, to set up a regulatory framework, a normative criteria for conservation, and also to develop a lot of scientific studies that back up our decision-making in conservation. As explained before, our cooperation has worked towards building local capacity in all the field campaigns. We capacitate our partners, and these persons are still working in the museum or have moved on to other heritage institutions, other museums of archaeology. So we kind of initiate a kind of a spread out of conservation capabilities in Costa Rica. And also in the area of communication, we undertook ambitious activities to socialize the exceptional values of the sites and to all the efforts that are made to conserve them locally, nationally, and internationally, which has meant not only the production of exhibition, but also press releases and a more complex management of mass media, including social networks, which was really a new challenge for people of my generation. Next, I want to develop a little bit, with a little bit more of detail, the community, the activities that are related to community engagement. Well, first of all, I must say that the current relationship between the Diquis communities and the spheres of the Diquis sites is undoubtedly the result of various long-term social processes that we don't know exactly how they were produced and how they developed, because they have not been adequately documented. We don't have many writing records about these processes, yet we want to engage in a oral history project. However, we can say that in the last 40 years, we can find significant moments. For instance, in the 1980s, some processes of local identification began to become evident in the population of Palmar Norte. And in addition to some protest demonstrations about the transfer of the spheres out of the peninsula, also the local government launched the Festival of Spheres, which is kind of a popular program, which not only increases the visit in the sites, but also like has a lot of like cultural programs and spectacles of many kinds. And also over the years, public art expressions have come about with the theme of the spheres, and these manifestations have become more and more abundant in houses and in cafeterias and so on. Now, the link between the spheres and the Boruca communities has also had some moments of great importance in the recent years. One of the most notable initiatives took in the 2011 when the museum attended the Boruca Community Museums for an agreement to transfer and safeguard spheres as part of the struggle for emancipation of the indigenous territory of Boruca Terraba. During the ceremony in which the spheres were received in the Boruca town, there was a talk about the return of the grandmothers. A conch shell was played, which meant that there was unity and joy in the community. And in this occasion, Doña Margarita Lázaro, which is a Boruca leader, then declared, I quote, "We have recovered 100% of our own identity since these documents were made by our ancestors." In spite of these and similar declarations, I have to say that the Boruca communities establish a relationship with the spheres, but not necessarily with the Diquis sites that were out of their territory. Now, in order to foster this link between communities and sites, our conservation program has undertaken various actions in the recent years. For instance, informative posters were placed in strategic points of Palmar Norte to inform the population about the conservation campaigns and invite them to visit the sites. That's really paradoxical because we receive a lot of international visitors, tourists, but actually many people of the communities don't know the site, so we want to increase local visitation. Public meetings, we also held public meetings to promote the exceptional values of the sites and also to socialize conservation achievements. Educational workshops have established very interesting dialogues with young students and school children regarding the complex relationship between heritage and communities. Likewise, over the years, we have begun to conduct guided visits that focus on heritage conservation. And we have developed specific activities for the Boruca indigenous population, which I would like to concentrate now. In 2016, we had an exploratory exchange with a small group of Borucas, including members of the Flora Association, the founders of the community-based Boruca Museum, around the spheres of the site of Finca 6. This was a first on a structured approach that served to identify specific common questions between conservators, archaeologists, and members of the indigenous communities. And some of these questions were, how were the spheres made? Who participated in their elaboration? Women, men, children, people from here, the Boruca, other communities. How the Boruca community it was connected to the sites and the spheres. And thanks to this initial contact, we established a plan for cultural exchange with the Boruca peoples. I must say here that the conservation efforts usually engage with communities. They only do it during the phases of value assessment and also to ask or to joint efforts for preventive conservation, but we wanted to go a little bit more further. This began in the next year in 2017 when a group of Borucas, including the members of the Flora Association, it was a group of 20 people, including community leaders, were informed of the progress of the diagnosis of the sphere of silencio during an on-site visit. We decided to have a meal with them, a meal that was invited by the Museo Nacional de Costa Rica. And this meal was a key element for community interaction and negotiation because meals are platform for exchange. In most of traditional societies, even in my family, which is not very traditional, the meal really brings dialogue and also helps to make pacts and accords, and also brings disagreement and so on. And this meal and after workshop was a platform to exchange opinions about the value of the spheres and the sites, and also to explore the expectations of the Boruca people regarding the intervention of the monuments. As a result, we record this conversation with the permission of the communities, and as a result, not only the questions that are already mentioned about the technology of the spheres and the future of the spheres arise again, but Boruca community members, including Margarita Lázaro, the Indigenous leader, expressed a positive perception of the conservation program, which it was really a huge step for us. This meeting also provided a space for new translation, understandings, and connections for conservation practice. We professional heritage conservators, which are trained in a Western tradition, often use the metaphor on medical diagnosis to explain how conservation diagnoses work. This is something that we do like very, very often. Thus, in this occasion, we use the same analogy and employ the analogies that we use. For instance, decay effects are symptoms, mechanisms and causes of decay are the disease and its origin. The conservation treatment is like a medical treatment. You have to take preventive steps and also direct intervention, and so on. Yet, this metaphor on medical diagnosis acquired a new meaning in this intercultural setting, since Boruca considered the sphere as abuelas, as a grandmothers, older woman, wisdom woman, and this is actually very interesting because this is a society where woman political authority is entirely accepted. We know from the historical and archaeological record that they were female caciques, and today many of the communities, they have like a woman leaders as Margarita Lázaro. This situation led to questions to all the stakeholders. How do we approach the careful and respectful medical diagnosis of a grandma? How do stakeholders transform into caretakers? What is the role of conservators and communities in the healing process of a sphere? How do we treat the natural aging of a respectable woman? What is the value of these grandmothers in our communities? How we can collaborate to take care of them in a short and the long term? Or some specific questions that are really interesting. For example, what does the mark of age mean versus a scar of a wound? What is really the difference between how we treat them differently? Tackling these questions were crucial to expand our perceptions regarding the value, authenticity, and integrity of the spheres as a living heritage and proceed conservation decision making. With this agreement, that is kind of intercultural pacts, the community explicitly and gladly accepted the intervention of the Mexican doctora and its team in the spheres. I have to say that I still wonder whether gender preference had something to do with such termination. The community also expressed an interest in being informed about the intervention and invited the conservation team to visit the Boruca community. In 2019, meetings were held within the Boruca Town's Community Authority and also the members of the Flora Association, who were invited to exchange opinions about the intervention of the Silencio sphere. especially about the criteria that guided the treatment and the possible future scenarios for its preservation. Many discussions took place in such a situation in which epistemological difference, negotiation, and agreement took place in a rather on a structural and very interesting fashion. I have to say, the bringing value, decay, and treatment to the conversation, we, both conservators and Boruca people, largely agree that care was necessary in terms of both immediately termed, but also in the further cuidado of the abuelas. We also consider that the sphere was to be conserved, but not restored, because a grandma with plastic surgery did not make sense. Thus, exchange resulted in a hybrid conservation criteria. This time, the Flora of Association requested a diagnosis of the community museum sphere, while the community authorities expressed interest in the conservation team holding talks at the local school where another sphere abuela is located. They explained us that these spheres were more because of this closeness to the community. Surely the other abuelas were important, but these were their abuelas, into the care, thus showing what Affection Zero has proposed about related feelings. In 2020, we went to carry out the diagnosis of the museum sphere, and we were invited to a meal by the Boruca Association, a traditional Boruca tamales. This was kind of a very cute and sweet gesture, but also part of this reciprocity that we want to build on with the community. Many cultural exchanges took place in this visit, where a new conservation language was appropriated accordingly. Yet the more kind of unsettling recording was that when we questioned about the presence of a cracking in one of the sphere, one of the indigenous collaborators became extremely worried. Actually, she went blank and blamed it on Cuastran, a Boruca spiritual entity that shows kind of a rebel and naughty behavior. To be true, I'm still working on the ambivalence on how to respond to such a predicament and how to articulate it into my Western conservation framework. However, I recognize that finding a route to manage the phenomenon is key to embrace a cultural exchange in which both communities occupy an equal stand. If they are accepting my terminology and my ways of looking at the spheres and evaluating their process of decay, I also need to work on accepting their own explanations about this phenomenon. Another revelation was made when we questioned the representation of the spheres in a river landscape at a mural painting on the Boruca Museum. And actually, at this point, one member of the community explained that this actually the aspect of one site located in the Boruca territory. We knew that there were some sites, but they had never talked about it. And I know that today, and these sites, including the sites with the river and the spheres, had not been allowed to Western archaeologists before. As far as I know, today, Boruca community is moving forward to making decisions whether to invite us or not to visit these sites. And I just wonder how conservation practice may be transformed in this setting. Conclusions. Embracing a community participation initiative within the framework of an archaeological conservation program requires knowledge of its specific territorial context, its history, and all the different social agents that have been involved. This analysis reveals, in this case, how international, national political institutions and community scenarios are really variables to ponder regarding the feasibility of a process of community interaction. Community engagement is really dynamic, changing, and challenging. It's a complex process of building trust and achieving results. And something building trust really takes time, and we have to be very, very patient. Working together depends greatly on the participation mechanism that we select and how we actually articulate them. I think that communities, indigenous communities, are pretty good reading if we are honest or not about our expectation or our promises. A fundamental aspect is that participation must be duly documented to understand the social construction that is being carried out. As we construct social engagement, we also construct new realities, and we have to be very careful about it. Community participation in conservation programs redefines decision-making and its consequences. Also, sometimes defines the aims of the conservation program. Yet, consultation, community consultation and community engagement is not easy. And for that reason, we need theoretical, methodological, and practical scaffoldings. And I'm saying scaffoldings because there is actually not much literature about it. I believe that the experience of introducing the notion of hybridity may be a fresh route, a trace that does not respond all my questions, and I'm sure that it doesn't respond all the questions of the Boruca community, but it stimulates inquiry and flexibility. It allows a new way of constructing conservation in a frontier, a liminal zone for hybridization, in which cultural encounter, exchange, translation, new meanings, conflict, and ambivalence are at the core of our practice. I have spent the last 30 years working in the conservation of pre-columbian sites in Latin America, which has involved sometimes the participation of indigenous communities in a specific process of decolonization, of emancipation. I don't think that this is like a winning formula for all these contexts, but I now feel that a hybrid route, which is always a work in progress, might be a productive trajectory to dismantle the dichotomies of otherness and to shape a better present and future for the cultural legacies of these resilient communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doctora Medina-González, for really enriching talk. It's such a great note to start on for our opening our series of events for this year. So thank you so much for the research you're presenting and the way in which to approach research in general. I think that we can all learn from. So thank you so much. I wanted to give the opportunity to anyone in our Zoom meeting and our virtual space to ask questions to Doctora Medina-González before we might turn to potentially Facebook if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you all. I think that hearing oneself and hearing the other always helps to clarify things or to get more confused, but it doesn't matter.
It helps anyways. Yeah.
It helps anyway.
I have a question. Thank you for sharing that, Isabel. It's always very interesting to listen to you. I was wondering, because you were saying that building these relationships takes a long time, and it does. It's not easy. And I was wondering it's not always easy to maintain those relationships, because as researchers, you don't live there, we don't live there, and it's easy to maintain that across space and time. And if you are not able to go back relatively often, these relationships cannot be sustained that easily. So I was just asking for recommendations. What do you do to maintain those relationships? Because what I've been facing with my project is that I have not been able to go back to the field since the last year. And I've been wondering, what do you do?
Well, I think that one book that it was really helpful for me, it's a book that is called Time and the Other. And time is also cultural related. and we don't know how all the communities perceive time. For us, time exists in a calendar, in seconds, in the watch, and communities, some indigenous communities have different times. I sometimes we don't have the time, or the project is not able to provide the resources for us to go every year, as I had the opportunity to do with the Boruca community. But really, we have spent couple of days together. However, one of the things that the Boruca people have told me is that Western people are always in a rush, always in a rush. And it's not something that, I mean, they are not checking our calendars. It's just that we are kind of showing that we are in a rush. We are not actually in the present time. So I think that if you don't have the opportunity to go back to the community or go back to the field every year, or you don't have the opportunity to go back, really spend a lot of time thinking about what the community say. Record, because you can go back to the recordings and to rethink. And when you have the chance to be there, really, you have to bring like a college of a college of techniques. You can have very structured tasks, but also you have to really spend time with them, just talking. And in my case, sharing a meal was really, really the key. Nowadays, I'm very fortunate because I have the friendship of Boruca people. Actually, 2 weeks ago, part of a couple of Boruca people came to Mexico to a meeting for the Red Internacional de Museos Comunitarios, and they invited me to spend time with me, and I offer my house, and they stay in my home, and we are friends. And one of the things that they told me is that I was really there. That for me, that they were pretty amazed that I didn't bring a watch with me, and that I was not looking at my watch all the time or my telephone all the time. They have this saying, which is really telling. La gente blanca no tienen relojes, pero no tienen tiempo. Which is really, really telling of what they think about time. For them, also they have calendars, they have meetings to attend, they have crops to grow. It's not that they live in a non-time space. They also have time. But when they meet each other, they are really there. So I think that Westerns, we have to learn to meditate and to really be in the present moment with the communities, because they are looking at you all the time. So for that reason, I also believe that perhaps taking notes and talking is not working. It does not work for me, because I am just, I am not a multitasking person. So I ask them to have recordings, and I go back to the recordings, and I make notes, and I try to spend really the few hours that I am with them. I try to be there really with all the senses open. I think that patience is a quality that most of traditional societies like and appreciate, because they've been resisting for centuries. They've been really resilient for hundreds of years. So what's the rush for them? They know that it's a long process, and we have to really learn that quality from them. And that's where, like this exchange, personal exchange, goes deeper into you and into your research. So that would be the advice that I would give you. Don't rush. Just take time. I think that for a doctoral student, sometimes it's very difficult because we have to present here and to publish and, publish and perish and, but I think that we need to take time to think and to rethink and to and to go deeper, especially when we are with them, because they are looking at us all the time. They are looking how you really behave. So it's like being with your abuela. You just go and have a meal with her and spend time with her, even though she doesn't expect you to be with you every day. She expects you to be with her during the Sunday meal. So I would really go to these principles, because academia is really rushing us all. So we have to change the piece, really.
Thank you, Isabel.
I see that we have a Facebook comment. Should I go ahead and read that?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So we have a comment from Solcire Kosikanki Marzano. She says, felicitaciones a la ponente primero. Me gustaría saber si el proyecto está viendo formas de trabajar con el gobierno local para integrar estos conocimientos ancestrales en las escuelas de forma permanente. Y en todo caso, ¿cuál es el rol del gobierno local en el proyecto? ¿Apoya con presupuestos anuales o espacios para laboratorios? And I'll just put that in the chat so you can look at it if you think.
Uh-huh. Bueno, voy a responder en español, como una atención a esta persona. Este es un proyecto que está financiado por el gobierno federal, por el gobierno central a través del Museo Nacional, y mi participación pues viene gracias a un acuerdo de colaboración internacional de Secretaría de Relaciones Exteriores. Entonces, o sea, yo en esa capacidad soy un diplomata en esa estructura, ¿no? Entonces, hay temas políticos de los cuales puedo platicar y hay otros que no, y hay temas que no necesariamente yo los conozco. Nosotros hemos tenido pláticas en las escuelas de Palmar sobre las esferas, y se hizo un maletín educativo para las primarias, que la están manejando el área educativa del museo, y de esa manera se está tratando de inserir. Pero yo creo que estos proyectos tienen que sostenerse pues realmente por todo el que quiera colaborar de buena manera a ellos, y yo creo que la participación del gobierno local va a ser fundamental justamente para la agenda educativa. Este, em, Creo que lo que pasa es que también las relaciones que se van construyendo, ¿no? Pues muchas veces hay cambios de gobierno, y entonces los planes que tienes con un gobierno no trascienden a los otros. Yo creo que una de las cosas que a mí me ha ayudado mucho a que este programa funcione es que, justamente como es una cooperación internacional, entonces, a pesar de que hay cambios en el gobierno federal, en el gobierno federal de Costa Rica, el proyecto sigue, porque sus tiempos de renovación afortunadamente no coinciden con las elecciones. Entonces, eso nos ha permitido como cruzar. Pero creo que ese es ahora, o sea, tenemos muchos retos. Ahorita, pues bueno, ya los del Museo de Boruca nos pidieron un taller de conservación preventiva, porque tienen una pequeña colección. No sé, todavía estamos trabajando sobre qué es lo que vamos a hacer con ellos. No es la única población indígena, también están los indígenas de Térraba, entonces también tenemos que trabajar con ellos, y creo que sí tenemos que ir a trabajar con el gobierno. Uno tiene que ser muy cuidadoso, porque la vida de las comunidades pues tiene sus momentos de turbulencia. Durante el periodo que nosotros hemos estado ahí, pues ha habido conflicto entre los gobiernos locales, los gobiernos federales y los líderes de las comunidades indígenas, incluso violentos, ¿no? Entonces, nuestra forma de poder mantenernos ahí es, pues, tratando de medir la temperatura e intervenir en momentos en que no vamos a acabar con una bomba y no vamos a perjudicar a procesos políticos, que pues además está muy fácil, ¿no? Nosotros llegamos 2 semanas, hacemos lo que tenemos que hacer, y pues ya ahí nos vamos y los dejamos con toda esa problemática. Pues no podemos hacer eso, tenemos que ser responsables. Entonces, cuando percibimos Y en eso el Museo Nacional pues tiene la temperatura, el termómetro. Cuando se percibe que hay algún tema, pues lo que hacemos es reformular los planes que tenemos. Pero la verdad me encantaría poder contar con la colaboración de los gobiernos locales, sobre todo para el tema del Festival de las Esferas, porque el Festival de las Esferas, pues es un festival cultural, pues que tiene un poco de todo, pero que sí es muy atendido localmente, y entonces sí sería bueno poder, pues incidir ahí para hablar de conservación, porque pues es un festival cultural, ¿no? Así muy genérico, ¿no? Entonces, que tiene el nombre de Festival de las Esferas, pues porque las esferas es lo que es visible, ¿no? Pero poco tiene que ver con las esferas. Entonces sería bueno, pues, como poder de alguna manera como traerlo a la vuelta, pero bueno, en todos los proyectos, em, ahora como señora de 52 años me doy cuenta que lo más importante no es el dinero, sino es la voluntad. Y creo que la voluntad pues no se consigue en el banco, ¿no? Es es una cualidad que a veces se da de forma momentánea, a veces surge de forma inesperada, ¿no? Y a veces se sostiene, ¿no? Entonces, pues esperemos que pronto tengamos, este, pues sí, señales de voluntad de los gobiernos locales para trabajar con ellos.
Solcire responda, dice, muchas gracias por su respuesta y felicitaciones nuevamente. Ojalá podamos coincidir en el futuro.
Ojalá que sí.
May I jump in to ask a question? I was really curious with your comments earlier about time. I was wondering about your experience with sort of categories and the way in which in archaeology we're trained through specific typologies. Those typologies we go into a situation that's community oriented with these sort of preconceived ideas of categories and types. Did you find within this process you had to really rethink that in terms of how we approach categorizing material culture in general through the eyes of this sort of community interaction and dialogue and being more open, sort of kind of unlearning these structures that we go into research with? I was curious to hear.
Yes. Yes, I think that my first experience was in Honduras, because in Honduras, as in Central America, there is no really school for heritage conservators and restorers. In Mexico, we have had a school for more than 50 years. And therefore, for that reason, we have two categories that are really disconcerting. Now I can see that they're really disconcerting. One, it's the movable heritage and the immovable heritage. But really, in a site, they are really together. And there is no notion of such a distinction until something happens. You know, when something is moved, then it's movable. But I'm not sure that people believe, as we practice in Mexico, that movable heritage is for restorers and immovable heritage is for archaeologists and architects. I don't think that in Costa Rica, that's really the way of thinking, not even for the museum. I was fortunate enough that I am teaching in a building conservation program. So I've learned architectural conservation and I practice archaeological conservation in archaeological sites. But the kind of practice that I do in Costa Rica, I'm not sure that I would be able to do it in Mexico so easily, because categories really produce realities, normative realities, permits. And I'm an archaeologist I have this cédula de arqueólogo that allows you to excavate in Mexico, but I don't dig because I don't think that is really my role, and because I'm worried that we have excavated rather too much in Mexico and we have too many conservation problems. I think that we need to really, I'm not sure stop, but I think that we should really take it easy with diggings. And of course, that's not really the point of view of my government with the Maya train, of course. No, we have a difference in that concern. But yes, I think that one thing that you have to think is that you have your own epistemological framework or your cultural framework. Really, you cannot do anything with that. That's something that you bring to the playground. That's your tools. And these categories are useful, but we don't have to marry them for the rest of our life, and we don't have to employ them in all the scenarios. I think that we have to be very pertinent with the categories that we can use, and we can use some categories to bring new discussions and new points of view, and for that reason, categories and theory is so powerful. For me, it's really, really a very interesting tool. But yes, when you approach indigenous communities, I think that you have to be flexible and you have to learn that that's your point of view about the cosmos. And that you have to, if you want to really learn about it, you have to be open about integrating things, criticizing your own, but you don't have to put them or to put any of them, or perhaps just a few of them in the bin. You just have to be pertinent about their use in your practice. But yes, like for me, really working with indigenous communities has been something that has changed my way of thinking a lot. I'm not sure that I'm the same person before and after. And I think that that's good. And I think that as much as universities integrate indigenous peoples in archaeology programs or in conservation programs, and that we learned from them as equals, and we add rather than substitute, I think that we are going to have a more open, clear, and or perhaps confusing, but at least a more complete picture of the consequences of our work, because that's really the thing. What are the consequences of your practices while using such categories? And that's when the thing gets kind of scary sometimes. Or good, or they turn in a good practice and you learn something and you can have a good understanding with the communities, which is something that, like after reading piles of post-colonial theory and conflict and I was kind of fed up, because the communities are not trapped in a bubble. They are also in evolution, and they are all the time, and perhaps they are much better than us creating these links, because they've been playing this game from the really dark bench, from the difficult bench, for many, many centuries. So they know how to resist, how to mimic, how to adapt. So I think that we need them really much more than they need us, in terms of the preservation of the archaeological record and in terms of the preservation of the heritage, because heritage is important for us, but cultural policy is not really helping, at least not in my country. It's not really. I think that is much more about people coming together and resisting, and they really have the PhD course on resilience and resistance. So we have to go to them and ask them. So I have to dismantle many things, and I hope that that is going to continue. Whenever I move to a different indigenous communities, I hope that I'm going to perhaps open my mind a little bit more.
Thank you so much for that insight. I think it's a lot to learn from for those of us that can't even imagine doing the depths of work that you're doing. So I think it's a really good lesson, and that level of humility I think that's coming out in your response is really notable. Like, we have our own sets of training, but we also still have a lot to learn. So I think that's a really great lesson to take away.
Well, I can tell you that I think that when I was studying my PhD, because of the nature of the PhD, I think that I was a lot more stubborn with my categories, because that's part of the PhD process. You have to defend your arguments and you have to defend your categories, and it's all right. It's an academic exercise, and that's the role that you have to play. But really, later on, when you are in the field and you are not in such a place, you can really perform in a different place. And also, it's kind of great to move from the academy to the field, and then to your house, and then to a bar. When you get older, you appreciate have it. I always said that I like it campechano. I really like my life to be rich of different experiences, and now that I'm much older than many of you guys, I really want to explore more things, and I'm less worried about my own stubbornness and my own, prefabricated ideas, and I use them to survive, to be in the working place. But I also know that sometimes I can, like, take off my academy costume and go on in a different way.
Thanks so much. And does anyone else in our Zoom space have a question for Isabel? And I don't know if we have any more Facebook questions. We don't want to take up more of your time. You've been so generous and patient. So thanks again to you, Isabel, for delivering our keynote address. It's a really rich note to begin our year. And we hope to see you again in other avenues, either in person or in other CLAAS events. Thanks to Pati Campos for coordinating your joining us for today, and all of our board of directors for coordinating the annual general meeting. So we can say bye to our Facebook Live group, and then send Isabel off. So we can stop that recording.